Assalamualaikum. I am Tala Suhail. I welcome you all to Virtual University's program on Personality Psychology. Dear students, today is our lecture number 33. In this 33rd lecture, we are talking about social learning theory, and this social learning theory was given by Albert Bandura. Now, before going on with the concepts which were left in lecture number 32, let us recap what we did in lecture number 32. जनाब, हमने लेक्चर नंबर 32 में we began talking about social learning theorists. We said that social learning theorists, they emphasize number 1 on role of cognition, behavior and environmental determinants. इसका मतलब ये हुआ कि social learning theorists जो हैं वो फोकस करते हैं cognition पे, इंडिविजुअल की थिंकिंग, परसेप्शन, एटीट्यूड, बिलीफ के ऊपर. Number 2 on behavioral or action part. Number 3 on environmental influences. That is all things that are there, objects, events, people who are there in the environment. And a combination of 3 of them influences the individual. So for social learning theorists, it is the cognition, it is the behavior, it is the environment which directly influences your behavior. Dear students, we are talking about Albert Bandura's social learning theory, और हमने ये कहा कि social learning theorist का फोकस 3 चीज़ों की तरफ है. सबसे पहले आपकी थिंकिंग, आप क्या सोच रहे हैं, आपका बिहेवियर, और नंबर 3 आपका जो इन्वायरमेंट या माहौल जहाँ पर आप हैं, इन तीनों के इंटरएक्शन से मिलके बनती है सोशल लर्निंग थ्योरी. नाउ एल्बर्ट बंड्यूरा हैज गिवन अस सोशल लर्निंग थ्योरी, एंड इन दिस सोशल लर्निंग थ्योरी हिज फोकस इज number 1 on observation. According to Bandura, we observe individuals who are in our environment. We observe them. So we observe these models and we take hints from them. Number 2, he is talking about another important thing, and that is that these models influence our behavior. And when we observe these models, we behave like them when we are under similar situations. So Bandura's focus is on 2 things. Number 1 on observational learning. Number 2 observation of models. Now in our everyday life we come across a number of models. We have got models as our parents, teachers, politicians, peers, friends. So we observe their behavior. So constantly observational learning is taking place because we are observing these models. Number 2, when we observe these models behaving in a particular way in a particular situation, when we are in the same situation, we behave like that. For example, if I see my brother studying very hard for GRE exam, when I have to take the GRE exam, I have to study very hard. So number 1, I am focusing on observational learning. I am learning by observation. Number 2, I am taking hint from the model whom I am observing. So dear students, Albert Bandura's focus is on observational learning and influence that models have on our behavior. जनाब, आपसे बात रही पिछली दफ़ा एल्बर्ट बंड्यूरा के बायोग्राफिकल स्केच की. उसके बाद हमने कोर कॉन्सेप्ट्स आपसे डिस्कस किए, और कोर कॉन्सेप्ट्स डिस्कस करने के बाद हमने ये देखा था कि विद फ्यू एग्जाम्पल्स we went through that what is observational learning, what are the models, और सबसे अहम बात ये कि हम मॉडल्स से बेइंतहा चीजें सीखते हैं. So let us begin with the core concepts. Number 1, reconceptualization of reinforcement. Number 2, principles of observational learning, in which attentional process, retentional process, production process, motivational process, reciprocal determinism. Number 5, the self system, which includes self-observation. Number 2, judgmental process. Number 3, self-reaction. Then we'll talk about applications of the therapy. Number 7, we'll talk about research. Number 8, we'll summarize this theory for you. And number 9, evaluation. Dear students, these are as far as the core concepts were concerned. Now, when we were talking about the biographical sketch of Albert Bandura, हमने ये कहा कि in 1952 he did his PhD, then he spent 1 year at his postdoctoral research, and in 1953 he joined the Stanford University as a professor of social science. So his focus was on social aspect of behavior. Now in 1974 he became the president of APA. Then he received a number of honors. He received the Distinguished Scientific Award from the APA. Then he received Distinguished Scientific Contribution Award from APA. Then he even received Distinguished Contribution Award on Aggression. Albert Bandura's main bulk of research is on aggression and learning aggression by observation. So if we observe aggression, we are going to imitate aggression, we are going to behave aggressively. So when we are talking about the main constructs, इसमें हमने सबसे पहले आपसे बात की थी reconceptualization of the reinforcement. सबसे पहली बात reinforcement है क्या? Reinforcers provide us with information that what a person must do in order to receive reward or what he should avoid in order to not to be punished. So पहली चीज हमने कहा कि reinforcers provide information and they serve as motivational agents. Number 2, हमने कहा कि they provide us with information what we have to do in order to receive reinforcement or reward, and what we have to avoid in order to avoid punishment. तीसरी चीज जिसकी तरफ Bandura is focusing, he is talking about self-reinforcement. Whatever we do, we compare that with an internal set of standards. मैं जो कुछ भी कर रही हूँ उसको मैं कंपेयर करती हूँ अपने सुपर ईगो के साथ या एक इंटरनल चेक या स्टैंडर्ड मेरे अंदर जो है, in order to see whether it is in accordance with the norms or not. So the third thing is self-reinforcement. Fourth important thing that Bandura is talking about is vicarious reinforcement. Now vicarious reinforcement refers to that when we observe a model and we see that when a model behaves in a particular way, in a particular environment, he is receiving reward, and I would also behave like that, what I am observing in the model. So these are the 4 important things about reinforcement which Albert Bandura is talking about. Number 1, all reinforcers provide us with information and they serve as motivational agents. एक तो हमें information दे रहे हैं हमें क्या करना चाहिए और क्या नहीं करना चाहिए. Number 2, they are what I would do in order to get reward and what I should not do to avoid punishment. तीसरी चीज is talking about self-reinforcement, that is all my behaviors are judged or evaluated against my internal standard. Number 4, he is talking about vicarious reinforcements, that is we observe other individuals and learn how to behave like them. Now that is where his contribution comes in, that is where social learning impact comes in. Then Bandura has talked about principles of observational learning. Now when we observe others, By observing others, we acquire certain skills. Simply by observing the models that are there in our environment, that is our parents, our teachers, politicians, peers, family members, when we observe them, we acquire certain behaviors, we acquire certain skills. So they formulate the basis or the principles of our learning. अब ये जो principles of observational learning हैं, they are four. Number 1, attentional process. Number 2, retentional process. Number 3, production process. And number 4, motivational process. जनाब ये 4 processes हैं, यानी आप जिस मॉडल को observe कर रहे हैं, are you being attentive towards that model? Have you been able to retain the important characteristics of what you were observing about the model? अगर ये दोनों चीजें, यानी आपने बहुत अच्छी तरह अटेंड किया है अपने मॉडल की कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स की तरफ. नंबर 2, you have retained most of the characteristics. Then number 3, you will be able to produce them. You will be able to copy them. You will be able to do and behave like that. And number 4, you will be motivated to behave like that model which you think that particular model's behavior is rewarding. It's going to facilitate you. It's going to help you. You will be motivated to behave like that model. Now these 4 elements are the basis of ऑब्जर्वेशनल लर्निंग, यानी आप कितनी अटेंशन के साथ मॉडल की तरफ उसकी डिटेल्स को ऑब्जर्व करते हैं. नंबर 2, उन डिटेल्स को रिटेन करते हैं. नंबर 3, आर यू एबल टू प्रोड्यूस द सेम बिहेवियर. एंड नंबर 4, टू व्हाट एक्सटेंट इज द ड्राइव और मोटिवेशन और डिजायर टू बिहेव लाइक दैट. So all these 4 factors contribute in observational learning. जनाब बात आपसे हो रही है एल्बर्ट बंड्यूरा की social learning theory की. Suppose we have got an example in front of us. Let us go through that. How are we to understand depressed behavior of an individual? A personality approach might talk about the person variables. A learning approach would look for environmental variables for this behavior. And an interactionist approach would consider contributions of both the person and the situation to the behavior. Bandura would combine the 3, that is person, his behavior, cognition and environment. Dear students, we are talking about reciprocal determinism. Reciprocal determinism focuses on interaction of 3. Number 1, the cognition of an individual, the behavior of an individual and the environment, how they contribute in the learning behavior. Suppose we come across an individual who is depressed. The personality variable or the personality approach will focus on the person variables. Number 2, the learning approach will focus on the environmental variables. The interactional or multidimensional approach will focus on person as well as the situation. Well, Bandura is going to focus on 3, that is the cognitive factors, the behavioral factors and the environmental factors, the 3 of them in combination working, and then we'll be in a position to explain why an individual is depressed. His cognition, his thinking is like that. His behavior is like that, and environment is contributing to it. The models, the persons in the environment is contributing to that. So that is reciprocal determinism. उसके बाद जनाब आपसे बात करेंगे आज self system की. Now self system basically refers to the cognition, and this cognition, how it shapes your perception, how it shapes your attitudes and belief. Now the self system of the individual is very important. There are 3 components of this self system. Number 1, the self observation, उसके ऊपर बात करेंगे. Number 2, the judgmental process. Constantly we keep on evaluating our each and every behavior. And number 3, we'll talk about self reaction. So this self system has got three important subdivisions: self-observation, judgmental process and self-reaction. We'll see that how they are interrelated. जनाब, एक और बहुत अहम कॉन्सेप्ट जिसके ऊपर बेंड्यूरा का बहुत काम है और वो है इमिटेशन. Now we come across little children who imitate, copy, mimic their parents, their teachers, their friends, their uncles, their aunts. And these children, they love to mimic or imitate not only real persons in their environment, but fictional characters as well, such as Spider-Man, Superman, Batman. They love to talk like them, dress up like them, behave like them, and try to model their behavior. Now, according to Bandura, imitation or mimicry or copying or learning by observation plays a very important role in personality development. Bandura and his colleagues, they have focused a lot on individuals who learn through models, and they try to copy these models, they try to imitate the behavior patterns of these models. A very interesting study was carried on by Bandura and Ross in 1961. This study was on nursery school children. और जनाब ये एक बहुत पॉपुलर और फेमस स्टडी है जिसमें the little nursery children were allowed to watch an adult life model, and this adult life model was interacting with a big toy. This big toy was a Bobo doll, and this big Bobo doll was with one group of adult model. It was badly, aggressively approached and hit and broken down. The other model, on the other hand, was non-aggressive with this big toy. और वो बच्चे जिन्होंने aggressive model देखा कि वो बोबो डॉल को मार रहा है और तोड़ रहा है, they imitated or copied the same behaviors. और वो group of subjects और बच्चे जिन्होंने एक ऐसा life model देखा who was non-aggressive, they did not imitate the aggressive behaviors. This was a very interesting study. Let us go through it. In one representative study, Bandura, Ross and Ross in 1961 worked with nursery school children who watched an adult model perform a series of particular aggressive acts towards a large toy Bobo doll. Other children saw a non-aggressive adult who sat quietly in the experimental room and paid no attention to the doll. Later, the children were mildly frustrated and then placed alone in the room with the doll. The behavior of the groups tended to be similar or congruent with the adult models. The children who had seen an aggressive adult model themselves performed more aggressive acts than a control group, exact imitation of the model's behavior. Further, the children who had observed a non-aggressive adult made few aggressive responses than controlled subjects. As this experiment illustrates, number one, children can learn novel responses merely by observing others. Number two, of equal importance, learning can take place without either the model or themselves having been rewarded or reinforced for the behavior. Dear students, we are talking to you about Albert Bandura and Ross 1961 classic experiment on aggression, where there were two live models, and these two live models behaved differently with a big Bobo doll. One model was very aggressive, the other was non-aggressive. Those group of children in the experimental group who saw the aggressive model behaved aggressively, and the children in the control group where the life model was non-aggressive behaved or made very few aggressive responses. इस एक्सपेरिमेंट से दो चीजें हमारे सामने आती हैं. नंबर वन, लर्निंग टेक्स प्लेस बाय ऑब्जर्वेशन, यानी मैं जो कुछ देखती हूँ उसको, जो कुछ मैं ऑब्जर्व कर रही हूँ, आई एम लर्निंग इट. Number two, whether the model's behavior is reinforced or not, people learn from it. यानी वो अच्छा कर रहा है या बुरा कर रहा है, उसको रिवॉर्ड मिल रहा है या उसे सजा मिल रही है, इज अनदर थिंग, बट people learn by observing. So two things come out of this classic experiment, that is learning takes place simply by observing, and number two, whether the model or the subject who's observing is being reinforced or not, उसको कोई reward या कोई incentive मिल रहा है या नहीं मिल रहा है, वो फिर भी उसको observe करने से learning is taking place. In human cultures, it is not only children, for example, who learn what they see, but individuals may also be influenced by models, pictorial representations such as those in movies. Television are highly influential sources of models. Bandura, Ross and Ross, for example, found that children who watched the aggressive behavior of a live model were equal in their tendency to imitate than children who were shown a movie of the same behavior or even an animated cartoon. Example, all films, television dramas and cartoons where heroes or models behave aggressively are teaching observers to be aggressive and violent. Dear students, we are talking to you about the role and influence of models. It has been seen that not only do we learn by observing people in our normal everyday life, but what we watch in the movies, on the television, in dramas, in animated cartoon movies, well, they also teach us to be aggressive. So all English movies or all television dramas or cartoon films where a lot of aggression is being promoted, well, they serve as a method where children as well as adults are being influenced by them. And not only do we take hint and not only do we learn from live models in our environment, we learn a lot of behaviors from models which are there in the movies, the heroes of the movies, the drama characters or the animated cartoon characters where a lot of aggression is being promoted. So we take or we do a lot of learning by simply observing them. Dear students, we are talking to you about the influence of observational learning और हम इसमें बात करें impact of model और हमने ये कहा we just got this point clear that not only are we influenced by models that are there in our environment, we are also influenced by characters or fictional characters in the movies, in the dramas, in different cartoon or animated films. So we are even influenced by them. There is another important aspect. Bandura suggests that exposure to models can influence behavior in two ways. First, if a model's behavior may simply serve to elicit the performance of similar responses, this facilitating effect is especially likely to occur when the behavior is of a socially acceptable nature. Second, the second way a model may influence an observer occurs when the model is performing a deviant behavior. The observer's inhibition about performing the behavior may be strengthened or weakened by watching the model depending on whether the model's behavior has been punished or rewarded. Hartup in 1967, for example, demonstrated that children who saw a model's aggressive behavior being rewarded showed a high degree of imitative aggression, while those who saw it consistently punished exhibited practically no imitative behavior. Children exposed to models, sometimes rewarded and sometimes punished, displayed an intermediate amount of aggression. Dear students, we are talking to you about the role or influence of model on learning. सबसे पहले हमने जिस चीज की आपसे बात की वो ये है कि there are certain behaviors which we observe and they facilitate in performance of our own behavior. So वो behavior जो मैंने किसी model में देखा and this particular behavior elicited, evoked or helped me to perform a behavior is called the facilitating effect or impact. और ये उस सूरत में होगा जब कोई भी बिहेवियर सोशली एक्सेप्टेबल है. Now when I see that young people, young successful people are very respectful towards their elders, when I see young people learning a lot from their elders, well, if this by simple observation elicit a behavior that I should also respect my elders, this is a facilitating effect. It has elicited a response in me. If I see somebody studying hard and I study hard, well, this is a facilitating effect. दूसरी तरफ हम जब एक किसी मॉडल को एक डेविएंट, एक ऐसा बिहेवियर परफॉर्म करते हुए देखते हैं which is not acceptable, which is not approved by the society, well, two things can happen. Number one, it's going to strengthen that deviant behavior in me. Number two, it can weaken it. दो चीजें हो सकती हैं. अगर मैं किसी को कोई डेविएंट फॉल्टी बिहेवियर किसी मॉडल को करते हुए देखती हूँ, two things can happen. This faulty behavior, deviant behavior can become cemented within me, it can become strengthened within me, or it can become weakened. और दूसरी तरफ ये हो सकता है कि ये weaken हो. Weaken उस सूरत में होगा, it will be weakened when I see somebody being punished, and it will be strengthened जब मैं देखती हूँ कि deviant behavior है और उसको कोई reward और reinforcement नहीं मिले. Now there is a study, and this study is by Hartup in 1967, where he is talking about a group of children, and this group of children saw an aggressive model, behaved aggressively, and this aggressive model was punished. So when an individual pictures or portrays aggressive behavior, and this aggressive behavior is being punished, so what is going to happen? This is going to weaken aggressive behavior tendency within me, and I'm not going to repeat that aggressive behavior. So same happened with the children who were watching an aggressive model, and this aggressive model was being punished consistently. So children did not repeat that. On the other hand, those children who saw an aggressive model who was being rewarded, they behaved very aggressively. So वो वहाँ पे एक facilitating effect है, और जहाँ पर आप समझ लीजिए कि उसको reward नहीं मिल रहा, punish किया जा रहा है, वहाँ पे that response is being weakened. Dear students, we are talking to you about Albert Bandura's social learning theory. Today is our lecture number 33, and in this 33 lecture we are discussing observational learning, the impact of observing different models and learning through them. So we are talking about Albert Bandura's social learning theory and the impact of models. Bandura in 1969 has pointed to another kind of learning based on observation of a model, the vicarious acquisition of classically conditioned emotional responses. Not only may observers exposed to emotional reactions of a model experience similar reactions, but they may also begin to respond emotionally to stimuli that produce these reactions in the model. Over the years, many writers have recognized that individual dispositions and situational forces interact to produce behavior, but these interactional processes have been conceptualized in three very different ways. Dear students, we are talking to you about impact of observation and the models that we observe. Now, there's a very interesting research. And in this research, Bandura is talking about that we go through a vicarious learning. This vicarious learning includes emotional vicarious learning as well. That is, if we see a model who's behaving emotionally towards a stimuli, we also learn to behave emotionally in a similar way to the same stimuli. So जनाब, आप सिर्फ और सिर्फ अवर्ट रिस्पॉन्सेस नहीं सीख रहे, कवर्ट रिस्पॉन्सेस भी सीख रहे, और इमोशनल किस्म के रिस्पॉन्सेस में भी विकेरियस लर्निंग और लर्निंग बाय ऑब्जर्वेशन इज टेकिंग प्लेस. सो इफ अ मॉडल इज crying a lot to a stimulus, weeping, crying, showing certain emotionally loaded responses, the observer is going to learn that and is going to picture them, portray them, project them when he or she has a similar situation. So there are many writers and personality theorists who are focusing on dispositional factors and environmental factors and the interaction of them, and we can study it in 3 ways. जनाब, एक तो है dispositional factors, the person, cognition, behavior. दूसरा है environmental factors, the environment in which the individual exists. So if we see the interaction between two, there are 3 ways of going through it. Number 1 is labeled as unidirectional interaction. Now, person and environment are 2 entities. They are independent of one another. So you can say that person and environment independent, not dependent on one another, and not one generating the other behavior. Bidirectional, the person is there, the environment is there. Both interact, but which is the causal factor, which is causing what, that causal relationship is not clear. Albert Bandura is talking about reciprocal determinism. In reciprocal determinism, well, there is the cognition, the behavior of the individual, and of course the environment. And the 3 of them combine together, they interlock together, and they determine the behavior of the individual. So, according to Albert Bandura, it is not unidimensional, not bidimensional, rather reciprocal determinism, where the 3 factors combine to give us a particular personality or behavior of an individual. और जाहिर है कि यहाँ पे इन्वायरमेंट में सारे सोशल फैक्टर्स और सारी सोशलाइजिंग एजेंट्स, पेरेंट्स, टीचर्स, पॉलिटिकल, रिलीजियस लीडर्स, उन सब का इम्पैक्ट और इफेक्ट है. Bandura is making the point that we must be flexible in considering the interactions of the person, behavior and environment. For example, suppose that we notice a student who is talking before a class. How are we to understand that behavior? A personality approach may talk about the person being talkative. A learning approach would look for environmental reinforcers for the talking behavior. And an interactionist approach would consider contributions of both the person and the situation to the behavior. So dear students, we are talking about an individual, a student who is talking in front of the class. So हम इसको इन तीनों तरीके से देख सकते हैं. First is the personality variable, then the environment variable, and then the situation that is talking in front of the class. सबसे पहले बात पर्सनैलिटी अप्रोच तो ये देखेगी कि द इंडिविजुअल लव्स टू टॉक. द लर्निंग अप्रोच विल फोकस ऑन एनवायरनमेंट. द इंटरैक्शनिस्ट अप्रोच विल टेक इनटू अकाउंट द पर्सन एंड द सिचुएशन बोथ. Bandura suggests that we recognize the reciprocal determining relationship among the person, the behavior and the environment. That is, the person has a tendency to talk, the environment reinforces talking, but it is also the case that talking feedback makes the person more likely to talk in future, and the talking behavior also contributes to making a classroom the sort of setting in which talking occurs. Furthermore, we need to realize that the person contributes to the nature of the environment, just as environment influences who the person is. So, person, situation and behavior are intertwined in a complex manner. जनाब, बात आपसे हो रही है एक एग्जाम्पल की जिसमें हमने कहा there is a student who is talking in front of the class. According to the reciprocal determinism approach, सबसे पहले person variables, उसके बाद environment variables, और the third is the how person influences the environment, how environment influences the person, and how the three are interlocked. So जब हमने person variable के ऊपर focus किया तो cognitive variables पे, person variables पे, तो the person has a tendency to talk. जब हमने environment variable पे focus किया तो the environment is reinforcing. There are certain reinforcements in the environment which makes the person talk a lot. अब एक person variable, दूसरा environment variable, तीसरी है वो setting जिसमें the individual in front of the classroom is talking a lot. So this talking behavior, it contributes to the reciprocal determinism approach, जिसमें person variable भी है, cognition and behavior, environment variable is there, that is the person variable who loves to talk, behavior is being reinforced, environment is providing such feedback where the individual is talking a lot, and the three of them interlocked in a complex way, telling us about a behavior pattern of a student who's talking in front of the class. Let's take another example. Bandura suggests that we recognize the reciprocal determining relationship among the person, the behavior and the environment. That is, the person has a tendency to eat and the environment reinforces eating. But it is also the case that eating feedback makes the person more likely to eat in future, and the eating behavior contributes to making home the sort of setting in which eating occurs. So this again is an example of reciprocal determinism where there is the person, his cognition, his thinking and environment, and the three of them interlock in and trying to explain in a unique manner his eating behavior. The self system, it refers to cognitive structures that provide for the perception, evaluation and regulation of behavior. In the self system is necessary for the explanation and prediction of human behavior. The three component processes involved in self-regulation of behavior through the activation of self-prescribed contingencies are the self system, which has got three important things: self-observation, judgmental process and self-reaction. Self-observation. We continually observe our own behavior, noting such factors as the quality, quantity and originality of what we do. Temporary mood states and motivation for change can also influence how one's performances are monitored and processed. Example, you have an exam, so you monitor yourself. Quality of your preparation, quantity of your preparation, originality of the preparation, what you do. Example, I am fat, so I monitor my eating. Quality of my food, quantity of my food and the way I eat. Dear students, we are talking to you about self-system. Self-system consists of a set of cognitions. These cognitions shape your perception, your attitudes, your belief. हमने कहा कि सेल्फ सिस्टम के तीन हिस्से हैं. सबसे पहला है सेल्फ ऑब्जर्वेशन. सेल्फ ऑब्जर्वेशन जब आप करते हैं तो आप अपने बिहेवियर की क्वालिटी, क्वांटिटी और ओरिजिनलिटी देखते हैं. सबसे पहले हमने इसमें एग्जाम्पल दिया कि आई वांट टू स्टडी, सो I have to prepare for an exam. So the quality of my preparation, quantity of my preparation and what I do. यानी मैं कितना पढ़ रही हूँ तो quantity है, कितना अच्छा पढ़ रही हूँ that is the quality. और किस तरह, what do I do? Is it that I memorize, wrote memory, रट्टा लगा रही हूँ, या what is my methodology? दूसरी तरफ हमने एक और एग्जाम्पल लिया जिसमें हमने कहा कि आई एम फैट, आई शुड मॉनिटर व्हाट आई एम ईटिंग. सो क्वालिटी, मैं क्या खा रही हूँ, उसमें कितनी कैलोरीज ले रही हूँ. क्वांटिटी, क्या चीजें, मिकदार कितनी है, कितना खाना मैंने खाया. एंड व्हाट डू आई च्यू माई फूड और डू आई गल्प इन फूड. सो क्वालिटी, क्या वो हेल्दी फूड है या वो जंक फूड है, कितना है, क्वांटिटी बता रहे. और नंबर 3, very important thing, what do I do? That is, do I gulp in food or do I chew it and do I eat it with satisfaction and satiation? Second important component of the self system is judgmental process. Behavior generates a self-reaction through judgments about the correspondence between the behavior and personal standards. Judgments also vary depending on the importance of the activity being judged, as well as individual attributions as to the determinants of the behavior. We are more critical of behaviors that are important and for which we hold ourselves to be responsible. So, second important thing is judgmental process. We have a set of behaviors, and these set of behaviors are evaluated or judged against a norm, against a standard. और हम उस behavior को बड़ी minutely judge करते हैं, which is very important for us and for which we hold ourselves responsible. The third important component of the self system is self-reaction. The self-appraisals produced through the operation of the first two components set the stage for individual to render an evaluation of the behavior. Favorable appraisals generate rewarding self-reactions and unfavorable judgments activate punishing self-responses. Parents, peers and other socializing agents set the behavioral standards, rewarding the individual for living up to them and expressing their displeasure when the person fails. These norms form the basis for reinforcing the self-system. Example, your parents, teachers, socializing agent reward you for all the good deeds you perform and express their displeasure when you fail to do so. Dear students, we are talking to you about self system और हमने कहा कि self system जो है it has got 3 important components and these 3 important components contribute in the regulation of the self system. जनाब self system आपका है जिसमें आप self observation है, जहाँ पे judgment से self reaction है. आपने कोई चीज observe की, judge की और फिर आपका रिएक्शन, अप्रेजल, असेसमेंट. और अप्रेजल कौन कर रहा है? अप्रेजल जो है जनाब पेरेंट्स, टीचर्स, वो सारे सोशलाइजिंग एजेंट्स. जब आप अच्छा काम करते हैं तो आपको रिवॉर्ड करते हैं और वो जब आप कोई डिसप्लीजिंग वर्क करते हैं तो दे आर एंग्री विद यू और दे शो देयर डिसप्लेजर टुवर्ड्स यू. Under certain conditions, children are more likely to model themselves after peers than adults or after models whose achievement standards are within their reach rather than those who set them beyond the child's capacity. We are talking about the role of models. हमने कहा कि बाज़ वक़ात यूँ होगा कि children try to model not their adults but their peers and at times not their peers, their adults. और वो किन को रोल मॉडल्स के तौर पे लेते हैं? उन लोगों को जो उनके लिए कुछ ऐसे स्टैंडर्ड सेट करें विच आर रीचेबल, विच आर नॉट वेरी लेट्स से एम्बिशियस. सो द मॉडल शुड सेट रीचेबल गोल्स and when reachable goals are provided to the children, they do try to achieve them. The self system does not function as an autonomous regulator of behavior. External factors affect these self-regulatory processes in at least 3 ways. आपका जो self system है, it's not autonomous, it's not automatic, it doesn't function by itself. However, there are factors, there are agents which influence it. और 3 तरह से इसके ऊपर influence करते हैं कुछ factors. First, as we have seen, the internal standards against which the behavior is judged are extracted from our experiences. Second, environmental influences alter the manner in which we judge our behavior. For example, a vast system of rewards including praise, social recognition and honor. And finally, there are external factors that promote the selective activation. You attend to some influences of interest and disengagement, selective inattention of self-reactive influences. जनाब बात आपसे हो रही है सेल्फ सिस्टम की और हमने कहा कि सेल्फ सिस्टम इज नॉट सेल्फ रेगुलेटरी, इट इज नॉट ऑटोनमस, देयर आर फैक्टर्स विच इफेक्ट दिस सेल्फ सिस्टम. इसमें सबसे पहला तो है आपका इंटरनल स्टैंडर्ड. आपका एक अंदरूनी म्यार जो आपने बनाया हुआ है जिसके ऊपर आप अपने हर बिहेवियर को जज करते हैं. नंबर 2, देयर आर सर्टेन इन्वायरमेंटल इन्फ्लुएंसेस. आपके किसी बिहेवियर की बहुत तारीफ की जाती है, यू रिसीव अ लॉट ऑफ प्रेज एंड रिकग्निशन. Well, you are going to repeat that behavior in future. So number 2, there are environmental influences. Number 3, there is selective activation and selective disengagement. आप कुछ चीजों की तरफ you attend to. Selective activation है, you attend to certain influences in the environment which are of interest to you. And you are disengaged with those things, or you do not attend to those things which are not of interest to you. So आपका जो सेल्फ सिस्टम है उसमें 3 फैक्टर्स जो हैं वो बहुत इन्फ्लुएंस करें. एक आपका इंटरनल स्टैंडर्ड अगेंस्ट विच यू evaluate every behavior, then environmental factors, and third thing is selective activation and disengagement. Dear students, we are talking to you about Albert Bandura's social learning theory. Dear students, we have yet to talk about the applications of the theory, the research, the evaluation, and the summary of this particular theory. We'll talk about them in our next lecture. Let us recap what we have done today. We have begun talking about the social learning theory. In this social learning theory, the focus is on an interaction between the cognition, behavior, and environmental influences in the learning process. Number 2, we have said that Albert Bandura is a social learning theorist, and in his social learning, the focus is on learning by observation. So observational learning is the focus or target. That is, whatever you observe, you learn. Secondly, he is focusing on models. What we observe other individuals as doing, by simply observing a model, we learn to do that behavior. So modeling or observational behavior and observation of a model teaches us certain things, teaches us certain behaviors, teaches us certain skills. Albert Bandura is talking about vicarious learning. That is, when you observe someone, when you observe a model, you learn to behave like the model. And when by observing a model, it elicitates, it evokes a response within you, it helps you in the performance of a response, we call it as the facilitating effect. और जब किसी मॉडल को बिहेव करते आप देखते हैं, and that model's behavior is being rewarded, you learn to repeat that behavior, you imitate that behavior. When you see a behavior in a model which is being punished, well, this particular behavioral pattern within you will be weakened, and you will not repeat it, and you will not perform it by yourself. So Albert Bandura is talking about observation, observational learning, modeling, vicarious observation, the role of reinforcers. Reinforcers, they act as informational and motivating agents. They tell us about what behaviors we should perform which will be rewarded, what behaviors we should avoid which will be punished. So it is our self system which has got 3 parts: the observational part, the self observation, the judgmental part, and of course the self reaction part. And the 3 of them help us in learning. Dear students, today we have talked with you about what are reinforcers, what is imitative behavior or mimicry. We have talked about the self system, the three components of the self system, and we have yet to talk with you the applications of social learning theory, the research part, and the summary related with it. We'll cover it in our next lecture. It would be excellent if you could go through the PowerPoint slides and the Word document that is available on the web page of the course Personality Psychology, and do write to us if you have a question. Take very good care of yourself. Hope to see you in our next lecture. Up till then, it's Khuda Hafiz.